A young man sits in a car on a freezing January night, laughing and talking with his best friend like nothing in the world is wrong. What he doesn't know is that the friend sitting beside him is wearing a hidden microphone, and every word he says is being recorded by police parked less than 100 yards away. He's about to describe, in his own voice, exactly how he killed a 19-year-old girl 2 months earlier. He thinks he's safe. He thinks he's smarter than everyone around him. He has no idea that the person he trusts most in the world just became the reason his entire life is about to fall apart. This is the story of Sarah Stern, a bright, artistic 19-year-old from Neptune City, New Jersey, who vanished without a trace on a December night in 2016. It's also the story of two childhood friends, one of whom used their friendship as a weapon, and the other who risked everything to make sure the truth came out. What happened between them is stranger and more disturbing than most fiction, because, in a very real sense, it started out as fiction. Weeks before Sarah disappeared, a teenager named Liam McAtasney sat with his best friend, Anthony Curry, and pitched him an idea for a movie. Both boys love film. Liam talked about someday making it as a screenwriter or director, and Anthony was already chasing that dream for real, having moved to New York to study filmmaking. So when Liam described a plot to him, Anthony listened the way any friend interested in movies would. The story Liam described went like this. A group of friends who had grown up together find themselves in adulthood, and one of them, a young woman, stumbles onto a hidden pile of cash. Desperate for money, one of her friends tries to take it from her. The robbery goes wrong. She ends up dead. Unable to undo what's been done, the killer brings the rest of the group in on the secret, and together they get rid of her body by throwing it off a bridge. Anthony thought it was a dark, strange idea, but nothing more than that. Liam was an energetic, dramatic kid who was always coming up with movie pitches, and this was just one more. Anthony filed it away and went back to his life in the city, never imagining that within a matter of weeks, a real 19-year-old girl from their hometown would vanish, and that the circumstances would echo Liam's pitch in ways that were impossible to ignore. Sarah Stern grew up in Neptune City with her father Michael, after losing her mother to cancer when Sarah was still a teenager. It was a loss that shaped her deeply. Friends and family described Sarah as warm, independent, and creative, someone who loved art and had been talking about moving to Canada to study it. In the months before she disappeared, Sarah had been going through her late mother's belongings in a second family property, and in the process, she discovered something unexpected. A hidden stash of cash her mother had apparently left behind. It wasn't a secret she shared with everyone. She confided mostly in her close friends, including Liam, who had known her since childhood and had grown especially close to her in recent years. On the night of December 3, 2016, Sarah's father was away in Florida with his girlfriend, leaving Sarah alone at the family home. Earlier that day, a neighbor had seen Sarah with Liam, helping move some of her mother's old belongings, a task that had become a small, ongoing project for her. Security footage later confirmed that the two of them spent much of the day together. They visited a bank, where Sarah accessed a safety deposit box. They stopped to see neighbors. By all accounts, Sarah seemed happy that day. She told Liam she was looking forward to hanging out later that night, and the two hugged and told each other they loved each other before parting ways, in what would turn out to be the last time anyone who knew her ever saw her alive. Later that night, a passerby noticed a car sitting abandoned on the Belmar Bridge. It was Sarah's gray Oldsmobile, engine off, keys still inside. When police traced the vehicle and reached Sarah's father in the middle of the night, his first instinct was that maybe she'd been in some kind of accident and simply walked home, since the bridge wasn't far from the house. But as the hours passed and no one, not a single friend or family member, had heard from Sarah, that hope started to fade. Michael packed up and began driving north immediately, terrified of what he might find. When police went looking for anyone who had seen Sarah that day, the neighbor's tip led them straight to Liam McAtasney. He was 19, in his second year of college, and studying toward a career in law enforcement, which made the situation feel almost unbelievable to the people who knew him. Friends describe him as social, funny, and just as obsessed with film as Anthony, someone who was well-liked and seemingly harmless. When police arrived at his door that first night, Liam told them he had no idea what had happened to Sarah, But he offered up a theory almost immediately. He suggested that Sarah had been struggling emotionally and speculated that she may have left on her own, possibly even out of the country. That explanation gave investigators somewhere to start, but it never fully added up. Sarah's passport was found untouched in her room. So was foreign currency she would have needed if she'd actually planned to leave for Canada. Her dog, which she adored, had been left behind. And perhaps most tellingly, she had texted her father affectionately just hours before she disappeared, showing no signs of the kind of distress that would explain someone abandoning their entire life without a word. Still, without a body and without hard evidence, investigators couldn't rule out that Sarah had left willingly. So their early search efforts focused on the Shark River, which flows beneath the bridge where her car was found. It was a heartbreaking task, made worse by the fact that the river's tides pushed steadily out toward the ocean, meaning that if Sarah had gone into that water, currents could have carried her miles from where she disappeared within a single day. Divers and search teams came up empty. As the investigation stalled, Sarah's community refused to give up. Nearly 300 volunteers turned out for one of the largest search efforts in Jersey Shore history, combing thousands of acres of coastline in the hope of finding some sign of her. Liam himself showed up to help search, alongside other friends from Sarah's life. Weeks turned into a month, then longer, and still there was nothing. Winter set in, formal search efforts wound down, and the case went cold. Sarah's father kept walking the docks and the shoreline on his own almost every day, unable to stop looking even after everyone else had exhausted their resources. Meanwhile, in New York, Anthony Curry had mostly moved on with his life, only vaguely aware that a girl from his hometown had gone missing. That changed when he came across a social media post describing how Sarah's car had been found abandoned on a bridge. Something about that detail struck him immediately. It was the same detail from Liam's movie pitch months earlier. A girl, a large amount of money, and a car left on a bridge after she disappeared. Around the same time, Liam started reaching out to Anthony far more frequently than usual, sending urgent messages asking to meet up, saying it was important. Anthony didn't know what to make of it, but the timing, combined with the eerie parallel to Liam's story, was enough to make him deeply uneasy. Unsure whether he was imagining things or onto something real, Anthony turned to his father, who still lived in Neptune and had closer ties to the community than Anthony did. His father immediately connected him with a detective working the case, someone the family already knew and trusted. Anthony explained what he remembered about Liam's pitch and about the strange, urgent messages he'd been receiving. Understandably, some investigators were skeptical at first. It's not every day that a case breaks open because someone remembers a movie idea. But Anthony agreed to take a polygraph test, and it supported what he'd been telling them. Then, while he was still at the police station, he received a message from Liam on social media, asking whether the police had contacted him yet. That single message convinced Anthony, more than anything else, that his instincts were right, and that his best friend might really be involved in Sarah's disappearance. From that point forward, Liam began calling and texting Anthony constantly, and it didn't take much for him to start volunteering unsettling details, including that he'd recently come into a large sum of money from a girl he knew, though he refused to explain exactly how. For investigators who had spent weeks stuck at a dead end, this was the first real thread they had to pull. With Anthony's agreement, police set up a plan. He would wear a hidden recording device and meet with Liam in person, giving investigators a chance to capture whatever Liam might say when he thought no one else was listening. It was an enormous risk for a 19-year-old with no law enforcement training to take on. If Liam really had killed someone and suspected he was being set up, there was no guarantee the meeting would stay safe, and there was little the detectives, watching from a distance, could do to protect Anthony in the moment if things went wrong. Still, Anthony went through with it. On January 31st, 2017, he drove to a spot near the boardwalk in Bradley Beach and waited for Liam to arrive. Once Liam got in the car, the conversation started slowly. Small talk mixed with careful questions from Anthony meant to draw Liam out without tipping him off. Anthony brought up an old excuse about a broken camera to explain any unusual behavior, and gradually steered the conversation toward the money Liam had mentioned. Liam, seemingly comfortable and unaware of the danger he was in, kept talking, first complaining about the money, then unprompted, bringing up his roommate, Preston Taylor, in ways that suggested Preston was somehow involved too. As the conversation went on, though, Liam grew increasingly paranoid. He warned Anthony that Preston wanted him dead and insisted they all needed to meet together to sort things out before, as he put it, things spiraled out of control. Then, without warning, Liam asked Anthony to prove he wasn't wearing a wire and began patting him down, checking his chest the way people expect from old crime movies, feeling for a bulky, recording device taped to skin. What Liam didn't understand was that modern surveillance technology had moved far beyond that. The device recording their entire conversation was nothing like what he was searching for, and his old-fashioned pat-down came up with nothing. Convinced he was in the clear, Liam relaxed and, remarkably, began describing what had happened to Sarah in detail. According to what he told Anthony that night, the plan had been carefully thought out in advance, built around the money Sarah had found, but it nearly fell apart when it came time to actually dispose of her body. He implicated Preston as well, giving Anthony and the detectives listening from a distance exactly what they needed. It was a confession delivered casually, almost proudly, from someone who genuinely believed he had gotten away with murder and was simply catching his best friend up on the details. Even with that recording in hand, prosecutors couldn't move immediately. Under the law, a confession alone isn't enough to charge someone with murder. There has to be corroborating evidence. And in this case, there was no body, no forensic evidence, no physical trace of what had happened to Sarah. Proving a murder without a body is notoriously difficult, and prosecutors in Monmouth County hadn't secured conviction in a case like that in over 4 decades. It took roughly 2 years of building the case before Liam and Preston finally stood trial. The trial itself was far from straightforward. Preston Taylor agreed to cooperate and even helped reenact the events for investigators. But the defense dismantled his credibility on the stand by exposing a history of him making up false accusations against his own family members in earlier, unrelated situations to reduce his own legal troubles. Character witnesses, Sarah's neighbors, friends, and family, testified about who she truly was, pushing back hard against Liam's narrative that she was struggling and might have left on her own. Her father took the stand and shared the last messages he'd exchanged with his daughter, messages that showed no hint of someone planning to disappear. The defense argued there was still no body, no forensic proof, and pointed to expert testimony, suggesting that if Sarah's body had gone into the Shark River, tidal currents could have carried her 7 miles out to sea within 24 hours, meaning she might never be found. For a while, it looked like reasonable doubt might be enough. Then the prosecution called its final witness, Anthony Curry. When the recording from that January night was finally played for the jury, the reaction in the courtroom was visceral. Jurors watched Liam, sitting right there in the defendant's chair, hearing his own recorded voice describe the killing in his own words for the first time since it happened. The defense tried to argue that Liam had simply been performing, telling a wild story to impress his friend who worked in film, essentially auditioning for a role. But it didn't hold up. What was on that recording wasn't a performance. It was a confession, delivered by someone who had no idea he was being listened to. Following Anthony's testimony, the defense's case collapsed. The jury returned a guilty verdict, closing out one of the most unusual and emotionally difficult cases the region had seen in decades, one that had only been solved because a friend was willing to risk his own safety to expose the truth. In the years since, life has moved forward in complicated ways for everyone involved. Anthony chose to stay in New Jersey rather than fully relocate to New York, and pursued the filmmaking career he'd always dreamed of, eventually releasing his first feature film in 2022, with more projects following. Sarah's father, Michael, has spent the years since her death honoring her memory, helping organize an annual community art festival in her name, with proceeds going toward scholarships for young artists, a tribute to Sarah's own love of art and her dream of studying it. To the public, Sarah Stern became known as the center of a shocking true crime case. But to the people who loved her, she remained simply a kind, creative young woman whose life was cut short far too soon, and whose memory continues to bring her community together even now.